This House is in session. Minutes of the meeting held on Tuesday, 16th June 2020 to be deferred. Honorable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be deferred.
The question is that the aforementioned minutes be deferred. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are hereby deferred.
Announcements by Your Honor, the Speaker. Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General. Petitions, papers.
Mr. Speaker, I'm commanded to lay the audited financial statements for the Board of Management of the Clayton Griffith Secondary School for the financial years 31st of March 2009 to March 31st, 2016, and the audited financial statements and annual report of the activities of the Board of Management of Harrison College for the financial year April 2013 to March 2014.
Government notices, private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills, statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Honorable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of standing orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42, subsection 5, 43, and 44 be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended.
private members' business, sir.
I just wish to inform the Honorable Chamber that in relation to the private member's business, each honorable member will be allowed a maximum of 30 minutes.
I should also indicate.
With the House's permission, we will start with order number 4.
Order number 4, sir. In the name of Christchurch South, the Honorable Member of Christchurch South, to move the passing of a resolution that the House of Assembly, acting on behalf of and in the name of the people of Barbados, reconfirms the commitment of the nation of Barbados to champion and advocate for the cause of freedom and respect for human rights, inclusive of the eradication of all forms of anti-black racism. B, extends sincere and profound condolences to the immediate family of the late George Floyd, to his extended African American family, and to all American citizens, irrespective of race, who were deeply hurt by the tragedy. C, expresses support for the principle that Black Lives Matter and endorses the notion that it will not be possible to unequivocally assert that all lives matter unless and until all black lives are in theory and in practice treated with respect and regard that is their due. And D, confirms that Barbados will be more than willing to contribute human and other resources and to participate in any regional, hemispheric, or international initiative that is aimed at providing assistance to nations that are currently struggling with their national efforts to eradicate racism in general and anti-black racism in particular.
Honorable Member for Christchurch South.
I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave of your honor to, just for a few seconds, express my own sympathy to those two young men who died tragically yesterday. Permit me to call their names, Mr. Glenroy James and Mr. Christoph Griffith. And I believe Mr. Griffith was involved in the business of journalism, and the business of journalism and the business of politics often coincide, and all the more reason that we shall miss him and miss him terribly. And to his family, to his friends, and to his colleagues at the nation, and to his larger family at the One Caribbean Corporation, I express my own sympathies, and I know that the House will join in this expression. I'm obliged to you, sir. Your Honor, it is my honor and duty to move today's resolution as read by the Clerk of the House. In doing so, Your Honor, I will not pretend that this is any reinvention of the wheel. The resolution itself will remind this chamber that similar resolutions have been debated and passed in various international fora, not least of all the United Nations. And it is not to say that we regard the United Nations with any greater reverence than the other international bodies, the Organization of African Unity, the Organization of American States, the European Community, several international bodies across this globe, Your Honor, have in the past recognized the importance of these resolutions, and they have recognized the importance of a commitment and man's recommitment to the eradication of anti-black racism as it afflicts all corners of this globe. I suppose, Mr. Speaker, it was just another street corner. Perhaps it was just another city, Minneapolis. But it is important that it was in the United States of America, which has in recent times been defaced with incidences of violence against black men on the streets of that country that we like to say is a great country. And the world has responded from Japan to Germany to England in the southern hemisphere, the Antarctica, those countries in the Antarctic, South Africa, all of the young people, and I say the young people across this globe have reacted with the voice of protest to this event, to the killing of George Floyd. And why? Why this one? Why is this one so different? Why is it that this one has attracted the attention of the world in the way that it has? I think, Your Honor, it has to do with the nature of that violent transaction. It was almost as if the lenses in our eyes were reduced to slow motion. It was a murder, cold and brutal, that extended itself in the eyes of the world for some 9 minutes. And that is unusual. That a man sits on another man or rests his body on another man with apparent nonchalance and squeezes the very life out of that child of God. Cold, calculated, vicious, deliberate. Perhaps, Your Honor, the world that saw it came to symbolize, or should I say, the nature of that criminal act encapsulates a relationship between Europe and the rest of the world, between Europe and Africa, because that will be the focus of any debate on racism in this world, the relationship between Europe and Africa. We're informed that the incident itself took 9 minutes. And my position is that it recaptures an entire relationship between Europe and Africa. It was as if a minute represented a generation, and I believe a generation is 33 years or thereabouts. It was as if 3 minutes represented a century, and 9 minutes represented 3 centuries of a terrible relationship between Europe and Africa. But, Your Honor, at the edge of that arena of death was a voice of a young man, and I watched the video and I glimpsed him only for a split second. That act, that event was one of violence. And there are philosophers and writers who will tell you that the relationship, the colonial relationship, was essentially one of violence. And there are others who will tell you that it is organized hatred. But at the edge of that arena of death, there was a young man whose voice was heard, pleading. And I will call him the criminal, pleading with the criminal to save the man's life. And, Your Honor, did he return? Did he plead with the language of violence? No, he did not. If you revisit the tape, the recording, he used the language of brotherhood. I think the word is bro. He said, bro, he's not moving. Bro, are you serious? So that his resistance to this violent act was in the language of brotherhood. And that is an amazing thing. He did not return violence with violence. And that is important to note. And so we come to this place, and the world comes to this point in which it seeks to express revulsion against violence, against historical violence between Europe and Africa. But how do we interpret these events? How do we interpret these events? How do we bring a sense of understanding to what happened on that fateful day in May, I think? Perhaps in trying to interpret the event, we revisit the basic philosophical question, life's basic philosophical question, which seeks an answer to the relationship between the spiritual and the physical. We ask ourselves, is life an accumulation of physical events, or are the actions of men guided by a spirit resident in a soul? I speak in the presence of your chaplain. I speak in the presence of the leader of the opposition, whom I respect as a man of the cloth as well. And with their permission, I want to draw this house's attention to the good book, Ephesians 6:12. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of the world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Let us focus on the word spirit and spiritual, because the good book reminds us that life is not exclusively an accumulation of physical events, that there is a spirit that guides the actions of men. And Ephesians tells us about spiritual wickedness in high places. Those of us of African descent who for the past 300 to 400 years have known only powerlessness must meet this violence, must meet what the book of Ephesians calls spiritual wickedness in high places. Do we meet it equally with spiritual wickedness? Do we? Or do we search into our souls and respond with virtue, and respond with a spirit that is opposite to what we have met? And when I say we, I'm talking about the Africans and the people in the Caribbean. What we have met for the last 300-400 years. In short, even under oppression, is there space within our being for acts of morality? Can we, as a people, find it within our souls to respond in the way that the young man responded at that arena of death when his brother was being killed? He found the language of brotherhood. He found the language of love. And in ordinary life, when we are oppressed, one of the most difficult things to achieve is that response based on love, that response based on brotherhood. Can we as a people locate it within our being? It takes faith, Your Honor. It is a leap of faith into that reservoir, into the soul, and find the spirit of love in response to hatred. The good book, again, will tell you that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Such is the power of this thing called faith. But it is a difficult path to travel. And we know it and we admit it. It is a difficult path to travel. But faith reminds us that it involves hope. Faith reminds us that even though we do not see the results, even though we do not see the evidence, faith is so strong that we experience it, we feel it. We may not be able to convince others of the existence of faith. Perhaps the man at the edge of that arena of death had faith that the other man would not have done what he did, but he kept his faith and he called him brother. And where there's faith and where there's hope, we're reminded that the greatest of these three is love. And this theme of love always comes back to us. The American theologian Walter Storff, I think is his name, reminds us that justice is nothing except a manifestation of love. We come to this place, we go to the courts in this country, and we talk about justice. Your Honor, the theologians remind us that justice is but a manifestation of love. So that love is at the heart. Politicians don't speak of love very often. But it goes to the heart of the being of man and allows man to give a response even to the most callous violence, because his soul runs deep like the rivers. The American philosopher Cornel West tells us that the African in the Western world has responded to systemic racism in various ways. And one of those significant ways is the expression of music. He always refers to the great jazz artist John Coltrane, who displayed the ultimate in musical excellence, the tune called Love Supreme. Love Supreme. Again, if humankind is able to dig deep enough into his soul, all of us will come one day to realize that the best response to hatred is love. Shakespeare would have written at the beginning of his play, Twelfth Night, "If music be the food of love, play on, play on." And that is what the African in the Western world has had to experience. Powerless, often no arms, no guns, but he has reached into his soul and he has responded to systemic racism, to what Cornel West himself calls organized hatred. And he has responded to that organized hatred with love. Around the time that Shakespeare was writing those words, Europe and Western Europe did not know the language of racism. This is interesting. What we call racism today is a modern concept. It did not exist at that time, and at that time perhaps it was only then taking shape. Race was a cultural and national difference. It denoted or signified cultural and national differences. Race, after that, was to establish itself as a social hierarchy where men were evaluated in society not according to merit, not according to their capacity to love each other, but according to the color of their skin. How did the mind of man become this corrupted, that a man's merit meant little in the face of his fellow man? That is where enters Christopher Columbus. our earliest introduction in our primary schools was that this gentleman was sent by Isabella, Queen, to discover these lands. You smile, sir, because you know that I'm about to say that you cannot discover lands where people are already resident. But he came and told the Europeans that he was going to discover lands for them. But let us move past the elementary aspects of Columbus and Columbus's expedition. He came to the Caribbean, and like all expeditioners, he will record what he has experienced. And he wrote some journals. And he spoke of the beauty, he wrote of the beauty of these islands. Amazing, he'd never seen anything like it. But then, Your Honor, he came to a discussion in his journals about the people, the Amerindians who were living in these islands and who were living in this hemisphere across the pond from Europe. And I want to say to you, sir, and I want to say to the larger audience, what Columbus wrote back to his queen, Isabella, and told her about the peoples that he encountered in this part of the world. And I quote, he said, "They would make fine servants." I repeat, Columbus said of the Amerindians that he encountered in this part of the world, they would make fine servants. So already, he is establishing a relationship. He is establishing a social hierarchy. He is seeing these people for the first time. Clearly, their disposition and demeanor reflected pleasantness and friendliness. And rather than enter into wholesome human intercourse with them, he sees them as servants. And Your Honor, that is the beginning of a relationship between Europe and this part of the world. That is the beginning of the relationship between Europe and Africa. But he did not stop there. He did not stop at establishing that hierarchy. He did not stop at establishing that he was master and they were servants, potentially. His diary continues, "With 50 men, we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want." 50 men, Your Honor. He boasts to his queen that all he needed was 50 men and a whole population of these islands and this hemisphere. He could subjugate them all and make them do whatever he wanted, so that the relationship is not only master-servant, but it is violent. He contemplates violence against the people that he encounters for the first time in his life. And that is the beginning, Your Honor, of what we know as the colonial relationship. The relationship in which one man sees himself as the superior, and that man sees the other man as his inferior, and that they are joined by that belief. And that if he can convince the other man that he is inferior, the relationship in his corrupted mind is complete. And so we entered historically the phase of Amerindian genocide. The history will tell us that the Amerindians largely disappeared. Largely disappeared. They moved from the genocide of the Amerindian, and when I say they, I'm speaking of England. And let us not be squeamish about speaking of England. England itself is apologizing for these past acts of violence, for these past acts of inhumanity. And they moved to Irish servitude. The English brought the Irish here to make them servants, to do as Columbus contemplated ought to be done, to establish a relationship of master-servant. And after the experiment in Irish servitude, they moved to the experiment in Indian servitude, indentured labor, I believe they called it. And thereafter, African slavery. Let me pause and opine that the relationship of master and servant was qualitatively different from the relationship of master and slave. Let me unapologetically make that clear to be my position. And so this relationship, this racism had its ideology. Because if the superstructure, if the political and commercial superstructure in Britain and England, if they want to convince their own populations that what they're doing has a moral justification, the moral justification that they discovered for themselves was that the African was inferior. And if a man is inferior, you can dehumanize him. You can make him into property, an animal, fit only for sale and barter and labor. And we discover that these parts of the world were never designed as places for social living, but that these places in which we are now resident were designed as factories, domains of production. The African was not brought here as any experiment or exercise in social living. The African was brought here as a factor of production, a means of production. And so that relationship became established. And it survived for many years, many years. And the march of modern man in this part of the world has been to dismantle the symbol of that relationship, the symbol of violence, the symbol of the dehumanization of an African population. But it is one thing to dismantle the physical plantation. But when the attitudes survive, the problem still exists. And I was so happy, Your Honor, when I observed by the media the march which took place a few weeks ago in Barbados. When the young people of Barbados protested, not exclusively against the death of George John, but protested against a historical relationship of injustice. That was pleasing. And why was it so pleasing? And why was it so different from other protests? Because we've had several protests in this country before. We've had several protests in London before. We've had several protests across the Western Hemisphere. But now it reaches into Japan, and young Japanese are protesting against a history of injustice. And even Barbados found it possible that the sons and daughters of Europeans, Africans, and Indians march together. What beautiful humanity. How beautiful is humankind when humankind is joined in a common cause. And Your Honor, to me, that was the beauty of human conduct that is worthy of emulation. And they marched at the crossroad at the top of Broad Street. Now, Your Honor, when a man comes to a crossroad, it implies that his journey is not yet ended. A journey never ends at a crossroad. I spoke earlier of the 9 minutes of that relationship between the officer and George John lasting... George John, beg your pardon. George Floyd. I spoke of that relationship extending itself over 9 minutes. And I spoke of that 9 minutes symbolizing itself into 300 years. 9 minutes. The challenge to mankind today, what shall we do in the 10th minute? How shall we respond in the 10th minute? Again, I pause and I congratulate those young Barbadians, Africans, Europeans, and Indians all God's children who have embarked on that 10th minute in a legitimate search for justice. I applaud them. They found companionship. And I suspect they found companionship with each other. And I suspect that when the Guyanese poet Martin Carter wrote these words 70 years ago, he could not have imagined that the words from the poem, The Discovery of Companion, would become as relevant and as prophetic as they are today. Permit me to quote, Your Honor. This tower of movement, bending on the world, is shocked to motion, crumbling knee and face in the strange sands of discovery. A gasp of fear is the first farewell to death, the first wave of a hand, the first heartbeat. But the return of arrival is merciless, is a pool of dark water, a terrible mirror. To bend on a planet of misery is revelation like apocalypse. No longer the trunk of a palm, the trunk of a tree, but pillar of endurance. Yes, to be born again, astonished and made bare is awareness of companion. While the blue swords of lightning kill, knowledge is intense and scorching fire. And only when a man is clad in flame can he be made to know companion. Those young people in Bridgetown clad themselves in the flame of past injustice, and theirs has been a most noble search for justice, and I applaud them. I really do applaud them. And hopefully, the legacy of my generation left to future generations should be that we transform those places that memorialize and celebrate past injustice, that we should transfigure those places to beautiful vistas, to beautiful gardens in which our children and our children's children will live genuinely in peace and in harmony and with love one for the other as God ordained that his world should be ordered. And if I must end on that note, permit me to end again with a poem again from Martin Carter, For My Son. That is the name of the poem, and it is a name that implies legacy. What do we leave for our sons? What do we leave for our daughters? What do we leave for our beautiful children who occupy this country? Our beautiful children of Europe, our beautiful children of Africa, and our beautiful children of India. And lest I forget, our beautiful children of the Amerindian population, those of them who survived the genocide. Here once again is the voice of Martin Carter. The street is in darkness. Children are dreaming. Mankind is dreaming. It is midnight. When they left that square, it was left quiet. Your Honor, left quiet. How shall that square be transformed? Let us return to Martin Carter. It is midnight. The sun is away. Stars peep at cradles. Far seems the day. Who will awaken one little flower, sleeping and growing hour and hour? Dew is awake. Morning is soon. Mankind is risen. Flowers will bloom. Again, Your Honor, can we find it possible to transfigure these memorials of past injustice to beautiful gardens where flowers will bloom, and the children of Europe and the children of Africa and the children of India and the Amerindian population that survives, where they can run among those gardens and be free and be completely free. Your Honor, I ask your permission to allow me to move this resolution, and I have done so with nothing except honor, and a sense of duty. I now humbly ask and beg of you, sir, to move that the resolution do now pass. I'm obliged to you.
I beg to second that.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And if I also may be allowed, I would like to associate my position here and the office of the opposition with the sentiments of sympathy expressed to the families of those who tragically lost their lives in incident of which was spoken yesterday. Join the debate, Mr. Speaker, in support of the resolution in its entirety, but I'd want to locate my remarks, especially so around Section C, or Clause C of the resolution part of the document, which expresses support for the principle that Black Lives Matter and endorses the notion that it will not be possible to unequivocally assert that all lives matter unless and until all Black lives are, in theory and in practice, treated with the respect and regard that is their due. There is, in political philosophy and social development discourse, the notion of the just society. One remembers well the former honorable member for St. George South was very much associated with advocacy of this notion of the just society. I like to think that from time to time, if I'm heard and listened to, that I locate my sentiments where his were located and do advocate and promote the concept and notion of the need for the just society. This particular debate, Mr. Speaker, I want to set my remarks, and as I begin around reference to the notions of the just society, present my remarks in this frame. I believe, as I'm sure all of us here do, in the sanctity of life. We may not always behave like that. That is man. But we all believe in the sanctity of life. We believe in the dignity of humanity, whatever label it wears. And I believe strongly in the efficacy of the black race. The efficacy of the black race. There are those who would be happy to have those of black ethnicity settle for a token space on the periphery of life, of blessing. But I believe that the notion of the efficacy of the black race suggests that the black man not only deserves a place of equal prominence with all other ethnic groups on the basis of the sanctity of life and the dignity of humanity, but on the basis of the efficacy of his contribution. He's earned that right of a place of prominence. Now, the notion of the just society has certain theoretical elements that come along with that, which I believe from time to time we have to hold up to scrutiny and to question as we seek to improve the situation with reference to the black race, our black population, our majority population here in Barbados. There's the element of the notion of the equality of rights and liberties. That's a concept. Equality of rights, equal rights, equality of liberties. That's a concept, Mr. Speaker. What matters more and what has to be held up for serious scrutiny is a matter of, beyond the concept, the application of that concept in practice. Because we can talk in flowery and eloquent language of equality of opportunity, of equality of rights, but we have to search by honest examination the application, the context in which those rights and those liberties are given allowance and given vent to. Barbados still must honestly do that. Barbados still must honestly do that. Examine the context in which we promote the concept of equality of right and equality of opportunity and liberty. We must do that with respect to how those rights and liberties are applied. This discussion, this debate, again offers us a moment for national reflection on that. There's a notion of equality of opportunity. But as we move from class to class, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you know, you are a deep thinker on these matters. Your experience tells you that in Barbados still of 2020, we have issues here. I don't believe it's so much a matter of equality of opportunity, but it's equality of deserving. That's my own concept. Because what might present opportunity for person A in class A may be something denied person B in class B. And therefore the opportunity which notionally I am said to have, I do not have because of the circumstances that obtain around me, which are thrown up by the system or systems under which I live. And therefore I speak to equality of deserving. The person who is in quote-unquote class B is equally deserving of opportunity as is the person in class A. And might I add, I believe in Barbados, we don't have so much a problem with race as we do with class. If you want to locate your reflections in this discussion and debate on the United States or any other metropolitan country, feel free to do that. But in the context of looking at the black struggle, I want to locate my thoughts and reflections in what happens right here on ground in Barbados. And I would want to promote the concept of deserving. If I come from urban Barbados in Richmond or in Savannah Road,